Welcome to the Coco Lesa Podcast. The Coco Lesa Podcast is produced and brought to you by the HOH Collective.
I'm actually very excited because we just got socks with samurais on them.
Oh, did you?
So I had to walk around. Have you seen the samurais on my socks?
Oh, yeah.
The classic samurais?
Just like standing just so.
Fantastic, exactly. I shall pose for you. So, welcome everybody to the Coco Lesa Podcast. Thank you for being back with us. We, as always, appreciate you listening. Just sharing our home. Tonight is actually a very special episode that I'm really excited about.
Yes, we have a very special guest.
Don't forget you have to use your outdoor voice. Okay? So
Sure.
we're placed a little bit differently than normal, so we want to make sure everybody carries. But this is actually going to be our first interview. And this is super important to us because, like we told you guys last time, we got to the end of our LGBTQ episode and we said to ourselves, well, shit, there's no LGBTQ in the room. There's no representation. So how are we going to have this conversation? You know? And so it was very important to us to make sure that we could talk to our community and have it properly represented. And so we started to reach out on Twitter. And just so fortunate in how close the Twitter community is here in Auckland, especially when it comes to Pasifika. And so we actually got a great suggestion from a friend of ours, technically online and in person for some of us, P.S. Tyrell.
Patti, isn't it Patti?
Yeah.
And we're fortunate to be able to bring this to you tonight. So do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Bulbinaka. My name's Luisa Tora. I'm from Kandavu, which is in the south of Fiji. And I live in Otahu, where I work as a librarian.
Awesome. So thank you very much for being with us tonight. And I just want to convey again how much we sincerely appreciate it. It really...
Oh, no, it's great to be here. Thank you.
It's such an important conversation to have. And so, do you want to tell us a little bit about your background in terms of how you know P.S. Tyrell, just your origin in the community, and we'll lead into the rest of the conversation from there?
Sure. Well, Patti and I are friends. I think we met while I was at art school and before he went. And so we're both visual artists. He's more lens-based, I'm more multimedia practice. And of course friends with like FAFSWAG and Tanungango, the two, Patti and he are the two founders and their members. And my partner as well, Molly Raniwa Mikhail, who's quietly sitting in the background, just acknowledging. I guess I met Patti and Tanu when I moved here from Suva, in the capital of Fiji. I think it's now 8 years ago. And before I came here, I worked in human rights in Fiji, women's rights, LGBTQ plus rights. And just before I left, working with people who live...
what was that process like? I'm just going to stop you jumping right there a little bit. That's awesome, and that's important because I think your base, your origin comes from home.
Yes.
And so size-wise, things happen a little differently in Fiji, just like they happen differently in Samoa and Tonga and on an island period.
Sure.
So what was that like for you at the beginning, just growing into it there? Was it very organic for you? Or was there a lot of pushback? And the reason I say that is because in the Caribbean, LGBTQ is so different, and it's 40 years behind pace. And in places like Jamaica, you can still die for being openly a part of the community. So what was your experience there?
Well, I come from a sort of like an urban middle class background. And so my friends, I didn't realize this until I came to New Zealand and starting from scratch, and you realize that actually I was surrounded by a whole, other than my family, a whole queer community. And we would potentially go for days without talking to straight people unless they accidentally stumble across our path.
Beautiful experience.
So I was yeah. So it was, I didn't realize that till we came here. Like, oh, that's unusual for people. And because a lot of my friends as well worked or volunteered in human rights in non-government organizations, there was a certain safety, but also not. It depends. It's all a matter of perspective. Of course, that Fiji has been through several military coup d'etats.
Right.
And even when parliamentary, democratically appointed parliaments or governments were in power, they could be conservative.
Yes.
So, it depends on where you sat in the Fiji spectrum. I guess in a way we were protected because we worked in human rights, so not always. But at the same time, just on that periphery, there's also friends that suffered, and I hate the term, but corrective rape, as they call it. People who had, there's violence against them and all sorts of emotional and physical violence to sort of curb their sexuality in some way, so that it was always a shifting kind of line that like we could be safe amongst our community, but outside it you always have to be aware.
And this again is why this is such an important conversation, because I think even with all of the information like we were just talking about at our fingertips, there are so many things that people don't know and don't want to know. There's a willing ignorance to not engage. And I don't know if you've heard us talk about it, but there are definitely issues that until it affects you personally or someone you love, then like you kind of empathize, but it doesn't really register.
I did because I picked up on that for sure. My sister and I, who's also queer, we've been quite lucky in that our family is quite supportive, and I'm really aware that that is an anomaly, and that we've been really privileged in that sense. And so, but I also wanted in that, because I was thinking about it before we came. I always felt this sort of guilt, I think, even as a human rights activist at home, that other people got so much shit,
and you got to
but I got to be like really comfortable and go home, and my parents were all good, and
kind of the survivor's guilt.
However, having said that, I think that it's important to acknowledge when our families do support us. Like we try to set up a PFLAG, which is the Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays organization, and we wanted to start that sort of campaign, and we have pockets of that support in the community, but I feel sometimes we don't celebrate that as much as we could. To say, I know all this horrible, horrible things happen, but when you find love amongst like your community, it's great to mark it as well. But I mean, having said that, it's I think I've lost my train of thought because I just keep thinking.
No,
my parents were really like great about it. Oh no, I know what it is. Yes, because I was listening to a podcast, and it's true. Once it's fine as long as you following along the path that everyone is comfortable, but once you start to assert yourself, like in some way where you're like,
you're not safe, you're not the good brown person
when
anymore.
I'm not the one being funny, when I'm not the one being sort of mocking myself, as long as then it becomes uncomfortable. As soon as I like, why can't I come and visit my partner in hospital? Why can't I we buy a house together and get the same access to loans? It's just really basic stuff.
And that's what we were talking about with the taking serious. Because when you want... so a conversation that happens a lot in terms of race and definitely needs to happen in terms of LGBTQ. And I expanded that this week and learned about IA.
Yes.
But no, okay, so we talk about how when people have sat in a place of privilege for so long, they start to view equality as injustice. And not even just asking to be treated fairly gets a very hostile response in a lot of situations. And it's such a mixed bag because in both of these conversations, part of the anger is guilt from, I know this situation is wrong and not right, but I shouldn't have to be responsible because I haven't done anything. And then part of the anger again is, even if it's on a subconscious level, that loss of privilege, why should I have to give this up? And so that affects friendships, family dynamics, because it's things that people assumed that they were comfortable with, but they've just never been challenged on. And again, with politics and everything going on in recent statements, it's such an important time to have this conversation, because as a global liver and traveler, the thing I talk about is I don't really vacation places. I go somewhere, I'm like, oh, I like it here, and then I live there for like, you know what I mean? And a conversation that I had in Oregon back in 2014, coming into the Trump phase, post-Obama, was people in the States, not necessarily other places, considered themselves very progressive. And a lot of people, it was just a realization that they really weren't ready for a president of color. Because when they didn't have to discuss the issues, they didn't really feel the way about it. They were in the middle. But once it came up and people had to choose, they chose in a very hard, aggressive capacity. And it showed where a lot of people were in their comfort levels. And this is what we're experiencing now in terms of the equality conversation, where even if it doesn't affect someone, they get very strong-willed and strong opinion about it. Because, why should they have what we have?
Everything's fine. Why couldn't we just, I think that, I can't remember whose quote it was. They say something like, one of the most dangerous lines that people say is, but we've always done it that way.
Yes.
You know, that sort of like, why are you rocking the boat? Which was, again, one of those conservative parties in Fiji was their slogan for the election many years ago. It was like, don't rock the boat, which was kind of, it's not passive aggressive actually. It sounded quite threatening.
It's very aggressive. It's very aggressive.
I mean, there's that, and you're right. You're absolutely right.
Big stick though, big stick.
So, did you get a chance to read what's his name, Patrick's?
Yes, I did. That was really good.
What was your take on that?
Oh no, I love it. Patrick's he's this real skill, which is to draw the threads out of a big issue and just state them plainly, which is great because you don't want to confuse the issue more with analysis. I quite like that, and I agree. I mean, it's also what you said as well, Theodore, about that whole, as soon as someone tries to assert themselves, it's seen as an attack on your own rights, even though it actually has nothing to do with you. Like if it doesn't affect your life.
Right. And that's why it's so surprising. But we have it on a micro level. Because even at the start of our relationship, the way we experienced it is, my wife knows she's Samoan. That's not, and she's been immersed in it all her life. But I came over so proud of Tonga and to be Tongan and being surrounded by her Samoan family. Every time someone came, in Tonga. And so it just brought out this Samoan pride in her. And it's that on a larger scale, but it becomes very toxic and we don't think about it that way. And these conversations, I take more of an aggressive standpoint. Like the conversations are important because thought needs to happen, but it has to go so much further than the conversations. We can't sit in rooms and talk about it forever because when it's not someone else's issue, it can wait. But when it's about them, the time for justice is always right now.
It's always yesterday.
Exactly, And so Aotearoa was such a growth experience for me on so many levels because it was just things like you said that didn't register so coming as an Afro-Latino, a black man, like both of those intersections, it's not okay to be a part of the communities that I prefer to be part of. And it's why so much bi-erasure happens because you're one thing and one thing only. And if you budge from that even a little bit, everyone looks at you differently and it affects the entirety of your life. The same way we talk about how colonization and systemic racism in our own communities is a very strong effect as well. But it wasn't until I moved here and I had to start looking for places to live. It was like, well, I've never really been with anyone other than my sisters in a living situation.
Yeah.
And then it was like, okay, well, even outside of that, I've never really lived with straight people. And I was so fortunate because my community, my friends and family in Welly, when we moved into our home, I was the only straight person in the house. And I was like, okay, no, this is fantastic. And we were all people of color. And so it just created conversations and access to things that I had no... If you really care about someone, then you become educated. And this is why I say it has to go past action.
Yeah.
Because the only people who are having the conversations are the people that care enough to have them.
Yeah.
The people that don't care are already formed in their opinions and their views.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to budge them on that outside of extreme situations. But it, again, the understanding that I got in terms of even my sisters was a very misogynistic view that we don't think of personally as misogynistic is, well, because of these are the women that I love, I'm going to speak up for them. And the education that I received was, no, that's still not your place. If you really care, your place is to create space where they can speak for themselves. I'm like, okay. You know?
I get it. Yeah.
And so this, again, is out of love for the people that matter most to me. But again, it was being able to finally safely register and care about and be a part of those things because in New York, even though the community here is progressive in many ways, it's okay when you're out drinking and you're having fun.
Yes.
But when we go back to being sober,
yes,
this is your box.
When
you know, it's not okay for you to engage in this behavior.
Yeah.
And so, what experiences have you had here in that instance since you came over? Because the other thing that I encounter and have to explain to people is just because I'm on the other side of the world or there's a lot of scenic beauty, it doesn't mean everything is perfect. It doesn't mean that we don't still have issues.
Yeah.
And even though things may be better and approachable in different ways, there's still issues. So, post-migration from Fiji, what was the interaction with your role in the community and things of that nature and just the progression from there?
Well, I guess, again, just when we came here, because of a friend of ours who worked in the art scene, we joined the Pasifika art scene, if you call that, but surrounding the sort of Fresh Gallery Otara. It was quite a hub for people to come together, and art scenes you do especially if it's brown, you'll have a mix of people turning up, and you'll still have your family, but then so we were lucky in that, and so we met a lot of queer people that way. I'm talking about my former partner and I. And then slowly that progressed into, as you build more networks, the Love Life Whānau and Pride, and just getting involved in that sort of thing. We were part of a couple of years ago, the first Pasifika float that won Best Float at the Pride Parade.
That's awesome.
Yeah, but just like these kinds of conversations, and those are kind of like not macro but not micro either, maybe sort of somewhere in the middle. But as far as Molly and I talk about this all the time, we're like, I mean, there are trends in all queer movements all over the place. We're always like, yeah, you know what? We're the lesbians. I love y'all. I do. I love you all, but like, where are they? And that is always an interesting. And we live out south, so I talked about this in a Fight Back article that I did. I think it was last year. It might be this year, but just that whole thing of visibility and how, as migrants, finding your way, and if you are so family oriented and in family so Christianity oriented, so many different things, class, race, all the rest of it, and if you are dependent on your family for language support, financial support, all these things, then there are things that you'll make.
So much life into me.
All these decisions that you make to keep that community that you have, because once you step outside of that, then whilst there are opportunities for some people, those opportunities are not available for everyone.
Right.
To step out on your own and be an out Samoan lesbian or out Tongan lesbian, or I mean, like I'm older now, so I'm able to be like, okay, I can do this. My partner's Maori and Scottish and Irish and Chinese, but like we have different networks. But I just think about that, and that whole conversation is something that we always mull over all the time. It also raises that we're always looking out for lesbians, and I just think also like, what does a Pacific lesbian look like anyway?
Right.
I feel like I've digressed, but there's
no. It all ties in, and it all matters. It's all a part of the conversation, because that is becoming an increasing conversation in our community. What does Pasifika look like? And especially with a half-caste daughter, and me being so diluted in all of my mixes, it's been something that's been a new experience for her, because I definitely have issues with how people identify me and how I identify myself in relation to how people see me. And because I'm just black, and because that's so dominant, it erases so many other things. And we've already had very interesting instances with her experiences, especially being born so much lighter than we've expected. And we had to have a conversation because of my experiences. The reason I've done everything I've done, the founding of the company, the writing, is because I have this intense desire for freedom, because I was so trapped by so long for everything that my family is and what I was expected to be. And so we were having a conversation just from the place of my desire for freedom, and she was thinking, no, you don't get it culturally, you don't understand it. And I finally had to break down and just talk about how guilty I felt for so long, even having to ask permission from my family to save my own life, because living in their confines was literally killing me, and I wasn't going to make it. And it's the survivor's guilt again. Stepping outside of that, I felt horrible for a long time, like I had been abandoned my family. And so it's not easy, and I understand for a lot of people to really step away from that, the safety of that community, because there's also a push, even if we don't know it, or even if people don't intend it, of like in Ray, when he goes to step out on his own, it's cold out there, who's going to take care of you? And that's very real from a minority place. Like, no, all we have is us. You stand by your people, you stand by your family. And so there's fears internally and externally of doing what's best and what's right for you, even especially if everyone doesn't agree with it.
Yeah, totally. Which is why, I mean, sometimes, and I talk about this in that Fight Back article as well, which is why I'm really wary of demands from within the community that people should come out. Like, that's none of your business.
It's not.
That is not yours, and you can only speak for yourself. Well, I can only speak for myself, and I can put any pressure on anyone. I know that it's difficult sometimes if they're talking crap from behind the closet door, and giving you all this toxic shit in your DMs and all the rest of it. But like, it's not any of yours.
And that's the other issue. There's so many positives that come with online and the way it's helped us connect. But the negatives have to be acknowledged too, and it is a lot of that. Like, people have become so emboldened in a negative capacity because they feel this anonymity or unreachableness, and not even from a place of toxic masculinity, which I understand is where a lot of aggression comes from. For me, it's a New York thing. It's a old school New York thing. The internet has never mattered to me because who I am in person, I am online, and those two things parallel. So I'm not going to say anything to you or treat you a certain way. And in the other regards, if people feel aggressive, well, here's my address, and we can have this conversation in person. I guarantee you're going to feel differently about it, And so that makes understanding the need to stand up for people who don't feel comfortable or safe doing that, even if it's in an online capacity, important again, which these conversations. Because something I was just expressing to my sister-in-law last night, her sister is the conversation that my sister and I had years ago on the train at the beginning was, until you've lived someone's experiences, you have no right to judge. But then taking it even further, even if you've gone through the same things, it's still not your place to judge. Because you're you and they're them. Yeah. And we all process and experience differently. And there may be things that don't faze them that would break you. And in the reverse, things that don't faze you that would crush someone else.
Totally.
And so all we're all doing is our best. And to get down on anyone else about their best in a situation that you're not in is so, but people get so caught up in their own rightness. They don't think at all about the person that's going to be affected by their rightness.
Well, that's the thing. The internet brings out everyone's in a mean girl at some point. It's like, stop it. Just... I mean, I think so many amazing things. I mean, Molly and I co-created a show called When Can I See You Again, which is an all-female queer show at
one of
Fish
my
Gallery.
favorite soul songs, by the way.
And so I was, that we talked about that at the time, that the internet for that positive reaffirmation kind of thing, even if you didn't comment, or that the fact that it's online and a lot of queer positive people are online, and that others who are in the closet could do a random search, Orca and queer art, that these things would come up, and that wouldn't have been possible before. You know, you could be in a library, you could be on your phone and search these things and delete your history afterwards. That's all good, but like that, these things. When I first came out at 17. So my partner at the time, we went into the library, because we're both nerds, and looked up, put gay, homosexual, lesbian into the search engine, for the catalog. And 2 books came up. One was a health sort of manual thing, and I forget what the other one was. But the health manual had our names written on it, which means that some other clever person had gone into the library looking up the same thing and then wrote... It was so random. I was like, thanks, you thought of us, and you went to the library to do some research on gay things. I was thinking that, like, you're weirdo. But, so, I mean, thank goodness for the internet for the support that it does garner. The anonymous support that it provides people, which is really... And another thing, if you don't mind terribly, just because I keep thinking about it, is speaking of bi erasure, is, the stats, STIs and HIV in this country. Now, I can speak for Fiji, having worked there, but also just seeing what it is here. It says that it's straight guys, mostly Pākehā, but also some Maori stats in there, I believe. But I always think about, men who have sex with men who don't identify as gay.
Yes.
MSMs, right? And just like how much of this bi erasure, or even gay erasure there is for guys. And so it comes up in health stats.
And then it affects it extrapolates the way that it affects
people's partners and all that's just this crazy thing that happens, right?
All the time. They're like, well, this person can't be gay and that person can't be gay. They have a family. That means absolutely nothing. I believe in anonymity when it comes to important things, and so no names, don't. But I was interacting with an individual in a religious capacity, and his request, which I learned later once I became further in the faith, was to protect him because he had been excommunicated for being gay. But the way the conversation happened was, for him, in his mind, it was a sickness that he had been cured of. And he had a wife now and he was married, so he was okay. Yeah. And they were paired together because of their mutual sicknesses. So he was sick because he thought he was gay or had gay feelings. And I think she suffered from kleptomania. And he was like, no, but we forgive each other and we help each other through that. And so, exactly. And so it's that type of mindset. And so the erasure is a very real thing, and it's a very understandable thing. And I don't think other people, when they do it, even again in the LGBTQ community plus, understand the effects that it has on other lives. And that for me is kind of sad and kind of painful, because the place that I come to on it a lot is these aren't even things that 5 years ago weren't life-threatening, much less 10 years ago. So for people to have had to make the strides that they've made for us to get where we are, for the community itself to treat each other like this is insane.
Yeah. I think I retweeted something the other day. Someone said they wanted to thank all the gays who went before us, who did the gang so that we could be gay now. And I'm like, amen. Because, there's all these hard yards that are being fought. And I think that, to acknowledge how far we've come, far out.
As a progressive in terms of, not progressive in terms of mindset, because that's not how I use it when I speak of myself. As a progressive in terms of, I always want action. Where would you like to go? In an ideal situation first, and then in a realistic situation, where would you like to see us grow and go as a community in terms of where we are now and where we have the potential to be?
Oh my gosh. No pressure. Well, I mean, I was just trying to think of, the Love Life Phono, for example. I'm not saying this is the answer for everything, but I think it's a wonderful opportunity. It used to be placed within the New Zealand AIDS Foundation. Now it's, I think, just become a charitable trust.
Okay, fair enough.
So they're at the moment looking for sort of committee members to help, to run things. And that has the potential, depending on the outreach and support that it gets, to do lots of things for young Pacific, young brown kids, basically. Because there are a lot of organizations that do work out south, but there are also more that do with youth work in the city. And just that, to be able to provide support to kids out south, and not just out south, out west out east, but you know what I mean.
We have to acknowledge the need.
That there needs to be so much more work, and in a really holistic kind of thinking about these suicide rates. Such a tragedy.
Another thing that is not acknowledged.
Yeah, and there's so many layers that, that being as important and central as it is to people, it's one layer amongst all the different things that young people are dealing with.
I think suicide is definitely a part of a function of our community as well, in terms of things that are not acceptable to acknowledge and talk about. And that mindset again of, no, I can't share this. And so it's the suffering and silence that boosts those rates for sure.
And, go out and vote for someone who's going to support mental health services. You know what I mean? And I'm really happy to see the rates of young people enrolling and voting. They've just been looking at Itangata stories and that FFS vote page and all these things, but just providing that support in all the different ways that young people can access. And I don't know, I think that always it's great to involve young people in that response so that they design the things that they want, because it's great for us to think.
I want that to go differently.
I think
here.
Coco Lisa is one of those things of being able
Thank you.
I think every single thing, honestly, makes a difference. If they listen to podcasts, great. Listen. If you go online, if you want an anonymous, how they have that quit smoking, free texting service, just all these different things that
no
feed
worries,
into
we have
it.
vlogs coming soon as well.
Excellent. Excellent. But it seems quite obvious, but just in the current political climate, you'd think it would be obvious to a government, but clearly it isn't. You know what I mean? These are things that, and people who are doing some of this work, and then they had their funding removed. So it's undone so much, because it takes years, right? It takes a generation almost, to
but
that happen.
I think that's part of the conversation that she and I were bumping heads on a little bit, which got so heated for us in politics, where she was honestly saying, no, the government has a responsibility to do this. And just coming from what I come from, I'm like, but that's not realistic. It's realistic. I get it, but again, another macro situation. So I was in a predominantly, I spent a lot of time in law firms, on the working side, fortunately. And I got grandfathered into something that I really didn't want to be a part of called the Fun Committee. And so we put together like all of these events and stuff. And I'm like, I like people, but I don't like people. You know? And it was so funny to see the difference in my mindset because this was in Portland, Oregon. And Portland, Oregon views itself as one of the most progressive places in the world in terms of being accepting. But it's also, Oregon as a state is 92.7% Caucasian. And the reason for that is because up until like 75 years ago, maybe 100, it was illegal for people of color to move into the state. So almost everyone who's there is the descendant of slaves.
Right.
And so they're progressive to them in their bubble. But this is a place where back even up until 2013, there have been over 70 people of color, namely black men, that have been lynched. And all of those have been ruled as accidental deaths or suicides or things to that effect. So there's just to put that progressiveness in perspective. And so we were doing a Christmas event where we had to pick organizations to donate to. And I really didn't even understand how much I wasn't on the same page. Because my mind is blown being there because I've never seen so much open drug use and addiction. And then I've never seen so much homelessness. And so working in a homeless shelter there or a food bank, they gave me the numbers. They said it used to be that we were 15% ahead of the country in hungry families. The numbers evened out. It's not because we've gotten better, it's because everyone else is caught up. And so I'm going into the committee with, okay, we can do that and we can do this. And they were like, we kind of wanted to give presents to kids. And I was like, oh, okay, that's a Christmas thing, right? You know?
Fun. Don't make a difference in people's lives.
Right. And so I think that's a lot of the mindset. And we can even see that in the national posters and their advertising, you know, and as much as labor is a good direction to go in, even in labor, even in their conversations with the things that they want to cut back on. And so our problems are only really obvious to us. And this is why people being motivated and inspired for me to move in and create our own spaces has that level of importance because it's just one of those things where if we have to wait for people to get to it to do it for us, you know. And again, when we put that in perspective with the number of the suicide rates and the AIDS and the STIs and you know, so what do you think is our greatest challenge as a community, outside and then inside?
Oh goodness. I think, well, just geographically, Auckland is a hella big place. You know, just like we spend a lot of our time out south, and we sometimes venture into the city and back. We're really out west, and I don't think we're ever out east. But just that building a cohesive movement is quite challenging. Well, just from a view, when we're also quite antisocial, so maybe should have done a disclaimer in the beginning.
Home bodies for sure. Like it is so. It's Again, I'm good with people, but I don't necessarily like people. And then she's a hardcore introvert.
There you go.
So to go out in public and wash her in her ass, I'm like,
that's us.
And it's like, okay, I'm trying not to make people, they're all introverted. I don't want to make you uncomfortable. Okay, I'm going to stay home. I'm going to stay home. And I get it because, I'm so happy that we can do this. Because I'm telling you, I can tell you 100 times in my life where I've invited people to come over. They're there for 5 minutes. I'm tired. I'm happy you came, but I can't do this.
So, I mean, I think it's really challenging to get people... well, I don't know. Maybe others will have a better idea, but I'm just trying to think, like, as a city, or is it something that it has to be, like, regional, or how that comes together? Like, because, you know, when you think about Ngahuia Te Awekutuku and, like, the gay movement in New Zealand, and, like, she wasn't allowed that visa, and so a lot of that you know, they came together around something. You know, the States had Stonewall, and and I just think about, like, what is it that, like, you know, so marriage equality that was kind of interesting as a, but I don't know, as you know, like, what motivates people. I'm just like,
no, I get
I'm just trying to think what that would be, honestly.
And it's
like,
so different for everyone.
Absolutely.
Also, what show did we go to recently?
Oh, to Pati show.
Yes. So even there, like I said, I see the safeness. Like, most people don't interact outside of their group, and I get that because I do that too. And it's like, it's Auckland. I didn't think about it until you said in terms of size. I've always, one of the reasons I've never enjoyed Auckland is because it feels like such a lonely place to me. Like, Welly is so much more. Everybody knows everybody because it's so small, and everything is like at most a 30-minute walk away. So, like, you go somewhere to an event that's like a bus ride away, and then you see everybody you knew anyway. And that's how I met and got involved in so much of the community. And that's such a different experience in Auckland. It really is. And
our public transport doesn't help. But anyway.
And so even after the show, I think you were sitting next to someone.
Yeah.
And, like, but they didn't talk to each other. And then once we're home later, I was sitting right next to you.
I saw you. I said hi to someone at the show, and she looked at me like, when I tweeted it later, I was like, I said hi, and you looked at me. I'm sorry. Just like, next time it's too late. The moment's passed.
And so I think part of it is definitely wanting to stay in that safety. And so we have to figure out how to, I don't want to say overcome that, because I feel like if there are more opportunities and spaces for that engagement to happen, then they can. But it's also not wrong of people to want to protect themselves and stick to what they know.
Absolutely.
And like, again, part of understanding that in my own context, I was living in Australia, and I had I grew to love a bunch of people that became family, but the majority of them were straight again. And so I was looking for a new living situation, and I was getting depressed because, like, everything on these websites for roommates was all straight Palungi, and I was like, I can't do this. I'm not, the white men in Australia are super racist.
Gosh, yes.
And I was like, it's not safe for me to live with a white, straight, single woman. And they were like, what do you mean? You're being racist. I was like, if you don't understand why it's not safe for me as a big black man to live with a straight, single white woman by myself, then this is not something I can even begin to explain to you. And again, it's that, like, if you don't have any openly gay friends or family members or a part of the community, how do you understand those issues? You know, and again, as someone who's had a challenge building that community and those friendships here, so I do get it. Thoughts, ideas, or suggestions on how we create venues or spaces where that can happen a bit more?
Well, I mean, shout out to Fastwork. They do so much, honestly. They bring a whole different community that together around their shows and their website. They're very proactive in that sense. And, you know, they're also behind some of them, Love Life Fono. But I try to think that maybe it's that whole thing, because I also come from a smaller place, is that I know how to do this in a small community. You know, so that's what I know, and so I don't know if I can be like, well, in a giant place, like, to replicate that, because and it is potentially, it's just harnessing the internet, but, you know, that's a beast. It can turn on you as well.
Yes,
It's fine when you're petting it, but then what if it's like...
Yeah, it's also partly like you don't really know someone until you know someone.
No.
So you've built up this online collective communication and you feel good.
And then something happens and it's a trigger, and it's you're not who I thought you were. But I mean, because everything's a mask.
And that's always a very hard experience that, again, has impacts much later on people that didn't even have anything to do with it.
And if you don't have that face-to-face, it's kind of hard to nurture that trust.
Yes, it is. It really is.
Because, and so I'm not sure how that would... we have more access to people, but I don't know if we're having more real conversations.
So this conversation has been happening. Again, this ties back into the anonymity and the bullying and things like that. Yeah. Because there are people who have been able to have their hunger filled by the attention, but then it's created such a detached culture that, again, sometimes even in face-to-face, just the way people interact with reality.
Yeah. And hence that t-shirt, like, I liked you better on Facebook or whatever that t-shirt was, way, like, at the beginning of the internet.
When social media just
you don't
started
look like you did on
thing.
Facebook, whatever it was. But, it's sort of like, well, because the internet is a mask, and so...
And people... So the conversation that we have with perception versus reality, which, again, I definitely talk about in the book, is... Not everyone understands there's a difference between who we are, who we want to be, and how we view ourselves. And so I've definitely had interactions with people thinking, okay, no, they said they're this, so they're this. Because for me, sadly, even when it comes to the negatives, if I say I'm this, I'm this. And then I interact with people and I take that at face value. And then it took a place of growth for me to say, well, no, they didn't lie to me. They really believed they were this person.
Yeah.
And so, I get how we... So, I guess we've kidnapped you for a while. Thanks for being here. I guess to come to the back end, so something that we have in the States that's an issue is culture vultures. And I won't use the term hag, but it's something that was big there. I think Margaret Cho really popularized the term. And so we've talked about, it was mainly in the States white women who come in and take over gay spaces. What's the experience like with that here in terms of straight people either appropriating, taking over, but then not really putting back into the community in a positive way?
Well, I'm very fortunate. I don't... that hasn't happened to me personally, I think. But that's potentially because I'm always hiding in the background. But I've not seen it as much. I think because we're so tight-knit, if someone who's not... Like, one is not the same as the others, that whole thing. I'm just trying to think of it. I've not seen that as much. I've seen it more in the art scene.
Fair enough. The show. We talked about that so much at the show because there were like so many white art academics. And like I said, it's a joke from The Simpsons where there are all these hipsters, these young white hipsters at a Mexican restaurant, and you're like, we were the first to do Mexican. The Mexicans did Mexican, but they don't get it like we get it. So
they can like observe it, but they can't really. Yeah. I'm not really seeing that trying to inveigle their ways into the community. That's just in my experience. Potentially is happening in others, but I mean, that's very much a. She and I made a work called Dear Culture Vulture, which is a series of adornments, just responding to that whole thing where someone talks about you and suddenly they're the expert on you.
Yes,
and it's like no,
I will use it. I'm going to drop it. But there's a movie called Bamboozled, and I think the Wayans had a thing to do with because they're a bit to do in Hollywood. And it's so funny because there's this one scene where it's like this white college student who majored in African American studies, and his response, "Oh, great niggerologist! Like, oh, help me understand me!" Like, so that type of thing. I definitely get that.
Yeah, but, so it's really scary because I mean that's a thing, and I just if I might, I just wanted to bring up the point. You guys being great allies. the importance of allies and the using the platforms that you have, which is why Israel Folau was such a disappointment. But again, he said what he did. I'm not excusing him, but it's that whole the business of sport and how they went and did some social work somewhere, and so they get the points. But like on your personal thing, to say that when you have so much power and however many followers, that allies are really important. Like,
and this is our pushback.
Yeah. And use the platforms that you have. And I think, this is the other side of the people who are okay with you until they aren't side of it. And I know it puts pressure on people, but there's this page on Facebook, and I forget what it's called right now, but they're these old Pakia ladies, I think, and they're like, if you're sick of people asking you, so tell me about your culture, and you're tired of responding to them, just message us and we'll respond for you, because this is our community. We'll sort them out. And so they do that, and I've been looking at it. It's so random.
We were in Farmers, what was it, last week? And this lady, I'm sure she didn't mean anything by it, and to her she didn't mean anything. And she was like, do you mind if I ask you what you are or where you're from? Because we adopted a little baby from...
A little black girl from West India.
From the West Indies, and she looks just like your baby. So what are you? Where do you come from? And
white lady.
Baby.
And so I just, my eye twitched a little bit. Yeah, I'm Afro-Latino. Okay. So definitely.
Yeah. Right. So anyway, that's out there. But I just I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't have more concrete answers for you. But
I have one.
Yeah, no, go ahead, please.
Sorry. I know Fast Swag. They're a bit of a more mature, space kind of thing. Are there anything similar to them for youth?
For younger groups?
For younger groups.
Well, the groups that have since left school, that, they formed their own houses, so to speak, and they were in high schools.
Yeah.
But I think that there was, the Village Collective was doing some work. There's Rainbow Youth, there's Leva, I think, that were doing all these, that provide the support and have programming. And those are just a few that I can think of. But as far as I'm not sure what this high school content is. And of course, the younger you get, the more antsy people get about why are you gonna tell them about those things you're influencing them. But those are the ones that I know about. And Youthline and Outline, of course.
In terms of allies, and just to touch on it one last time, I saw a really awesome thread on Twitter recently, because gay white man, but there was an organization in the States named after Stonewall, and they were like, let's not dishonor Stonewall with violent protest. And his immediate response was like, fuck you, how dare you. This is a movement that was built on riots, and the only reason, and so that was a really beautiful and dope act of ally to me. Yeah. Because again, I think people don't really often understand, even inside the community, there's different levels of privilege.
Absolutely. I mean, when that whole Pride parade broke out, and the Pride, there's no Pride in prisons, people had that protest, and then they were like, why do you gotta wreck it for us? That sort of pushback that came in. It was like, have you forgotten how quickly you've forgotten, this wasn't given to people. This is where we came from. And some of us are still having this freaking conversation, it's not over. It never ends. So, that was really disappointing, but sadly, I say this too much about other things as well. I was just I'm not shocked. I'm surprised, but I'm not shocked that goes on. It's really?
I think...
I think that's a perpetual state, being brown people. When shit happens,
but I don't. I don't want to be cynical. Also, I feel I think I said recently, I want to change and save the world, but I just don't want to have to interact with people to do it. I want to make things better. And so I try, and we talk about positivity all the time because if you're raised in like a certain mindset, it's not even like you're trying. You just view things in a certain light. And so I never want to get caught up in things are so insurmountable that we can't do anything about it. Because again, at the core of who I am, like my little thing inside me, I don't know if you've ever seen Rise of the Guardians, but like the theory in that movie is that there's one thing inside everyone at your smallest that like really motivates you. And for me, that desire, not just for personal freedom, but for us all to be, is so strong. Because I can't breathe or tolerate living under someone else's thumb. And having to imagine other people live in a situation where they're dependent on someone's mercy who doesn't have their best interests at heart is just not doable for me. No. And so, like, that's where I'm not doing enough. You know?
Well, can I just end? There's one thing that I keep thinking about bloody Junot Diaz. It's his fault. And decolonial love. And just this whole idea of communities and the things that we do to our own children. In the name of culture, in the name of religion, right? And all these things that
tradition
that were introduced and that we now take on, in like more than the first Christians sort of thing,
right?
You know what I mean? And just like, I try in my practice. I need to do more about it, but I talk about wanting to build an indigenous feminist sort of practice. We call it vaso, which is a matrilineal line. But that whole thing of what are our actual cultural practices that are about community and supporting each other, not this other shit that like you've taken on run riot with, that other stuff. Like, because as a Fijian, you talk about velomani with compassion and supporting each other, and that whole system of your parents, siblings are your parents, and that sort of thing of nurturing rather than someone talked about, I think it was this curator friend of ours called Louise, there's a whole lot of calling out, but she said I'm more interested in a calling in, and that whole just nurturing that kind of talk,
right? The acknowledgement, how can we do better,
but like within our own cultural language and understanding
the conversation that we were having, just
just like, so that it's like, it's what it's what your muscle memory is all about it. How can we do that more? And I know that it's all, in sexual and reproductive health, you talk about making I statements. What can I do? Like what you were saying, and like, so I believe, rather than be all like, what you concerning yourself with them?
It's
you just like do you
conversation
with accountability, with integrity, and just proceeding through there, because there's everything outside of that is out of your control anyway.
For me personally, I'm so thankful that conversation falls here.
Yes.
I'm so thankful to be the last male head of my family, because if she wants it, this is my heir, and that's how we move forward. Because there are so many conversations that I just, like that need to start happening from this place.
Absolutely.
And it's so much to put on them, but it's if you aren't thinking about it now and having
it. That's why I love art babies, because they just know art. They don't know that it's different. And so, like, if you're growing up with that language, you don't know anything else, and I love it.
And that's why we have problems now, because we grew up with the language and did some.
That's right.
But on that note, thank you so much for being with us. Any more conversations or statements? Are we all?
No, we appreciate your time.
We appreciate you so much giving your time
Thank you.
Family, thank you for listening. We're going to break this up into 2 parts.
Okay.
But thank you very much for being with us in our home together, for having this conversation, for being a part of it and being open to it. And we hope sincerely that you will spread it and share it and help as many people learn as possible. So thank you all for being here, and thank you for joining us on the Cocolesa podcast.